Looks like we should be strange noises in the back. All right. Hi everybody. We're excited to be here today to talk to you, continue our conversations about boundaries, continuing from our series of 3 blog articles that you can find online. I'm Jennifer Kohler. I'm the president and co-founder of Atlas Assistance Dogs. Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself and take it away?
Yeah, my name is Michelle DeRosa. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm honored to volunteer as mental health consultant for Atlas Assistance Dogs. And I wrote the final piece of the 3-part series on boundaries. We've done a talk on part 1 and part 2. And just as a reminder, part 1 was what are boundaries, kind of demystifying what boundaries are, basic guidelines of the different kinds of boundaries. So whether it's a verbal boundary or a physical boundary, etc. Part 2, I believe, was about a deeper dive into boundaries for facilitators or service dog trainers, boundaries for service dog handlers. We talked last time about some examples and how to support ourselves in creation of boundaries, give ourselves grace. And then today, we're going to be talking about 2 different things. And one is what happens when boundaries aren't, I guess 3 different things. One, what happens when boundaries aren't respected, like when we have trouble with boundaries or boundaries don't seem to be working, and what boundaries we can place for ourselves. So boundaries are important for other people, but boundaries are also important for ourselves, when to know when we need to have more boundaries, less boundaries. And then boundaries for our service dog, which is really important, that dogs have agency and they have needs and need boundaries too. So I suppose we can start at the top, which would be the boundaries when boundaries don't seem to be working. And I hear this a lot as a therapist that we've got, so sorry, my dog in the background is deciding that now of all time he needs to go out. So I'm just going to message my spouse and make sure that he grabs the dog. Speaking of boundaries, I'm setting a boundary with my dog. Okay. So, as I don't want him to bark. When I hear a lot from my clients, like, I set the boundary. I told this person that I don't want to talk about this subject, or please don't, use this kind of language around me. Or if we're talking about service dog, I told them, please don't encourage my dog to jump or take food from the table, but they just don't seem to care, or they're not seeming to understand. And that can be really frustrating. It can be very tempting for us to just kind of adjust our boundaries or give up on the boundaries, seeming to think that maybe, well, I guess boundaries don't work for me or doesn't work for that person. And I'm interested to hear from Jen if she's ever had any experiences with this and what it felt like. I know for me in the past, when I've set a boundary, or I think I've set a boundary with someone and they just disregard it, I feel really discouraged. And in the past, I might have even just given up and just been like, well, I guess it doesn't work. I don't know. What do you think, Jen?
I think it really depends on the situation, my history with that person. I'm definitely someone that struggles with setting boundaries and not just sort of bending to do whatever I can to meet
Mm-hmm.
somebody else's needs. Um, and I've learned the hard way that actually I'm not helping the others necessarily by doing that, because if they're expecting that I will jump every time they reach out to me, well, in the times that I can't, that actually can cause them stress and
Yeah.
anxiety, and they can wonder what's going on. Where am I? Am I upset with them? And so
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that actually having boundaries of, here's what to expect. If you reach out to me through email, I'll respond in this many days. If you reach out to me through text, I'll respond this. If you call me without warning, something better really be wrong. You better need me now.
Yeah.
Um, for
Yeah.
example, but I found that, yeah, it's hard. And once you, as you said, once you sort of let it slip a few times, you start feeling resentful. You're just like, do you really respect my time?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's a hard thing to do, especially as people that are in a field of helping other people.
Mhm.
It's really hard to not put ourselves last.
Absolutely. And I like how you talked about the clarity of boundaries. You've had to learn how to be really clear. And so, one reason why boundaries don't seem to work, and by the way, it's normal to feel frustrated or to have that emotional feedback when boundaries don't seem to be working or you need to make an adjustment to it. But one reason boundaries might not seem to be working is because our request might not be clear. Maybe we've been too people pleasing or too porous. We talked about the types of boundaries. So that are porous are just very open ended. They're not specific enough. So it could be like, if it's okay with you, can you not feed my dog at the table? Or if it's okay, if you want to, can you please not do this? Like that can be confusing for others. So if you think, and I'm not even talking about people who disrespect boundaries, they may not be meaning to. Maybe they need direct communication because of their communication styles, or maybe they're neurodivergent or have autism. And these nuances to language, like if you want to, or if it's okay with you, and they might be thinking, well, no, I actually don't want to um, do that. But if we ask directly, um, instead of the I'm sorry, would you please? We want to clearly communicate what we need and assume that people can't read your mind or know what you need without being told. And that can be very difficult, especially with different, we talked about cultural considerations in the first talk, which is important to consider that different people's backgrounds or cultures might have difficulty or even take offense to more direct communications. So, working within your culture, the way that your family or the way that your environment speaks can be a little tricky in those cases when we need a little bit more direct communication. Um, Another reason why boundaries might fail or is because they lack consequences. So Jen said, if you call me at this time, there better be a reason for it. Sometimes when we have boundaries, and someone doesn't respect them or they step over, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, and we don't have consequences to the boundaries, it can be very easy for someone to just continue to step over those boundaries. So, for instance, if there is a statement, please do not call at my dog when we're out, say you're with friends and you have your service dog, please don't call at my dog when my service dog is working. We don't have to say in that boundary immediately, or I will remove myself from it. You could say that, but if there's no consequences, so your friend kisses and calls at your dog, um, what happens if we just ask again? Well, I can you please not do that? We might be in that spiral of just asking over and over and over again and feeling more and more defeated. So I like to remind that boundaries are not for other people. We can't enforce someone or make someone do anything, any behavior. We can ask, and usually we might have a positive relationship or a relationship with someone, and people are usually altruistic and they want to do things for others because maybe the other person's a people pleaser, but boundaries are for the person creating them to feel safe and have their needs met. So having consequences, if this doesn't happen, I will remove myself or I will leave or I won't be a part of whatever's happening to create safety for yourself. And, my mind's drawing a blank, but maybe Jennifer can share maybe some consequences. And I know consequences sound so big and mean, but there can be consequences. There's consequences for everything, positive and negative. But maybe Jennifer, you want to share some
Sure.
examples?
And I can think of simple things of um, kind of setting up your environment or the structure around it to help enforce those boundaries. So maybe somebody is always trying to have things run on longer and longer and longer. You can pre-set it up that you have a scheduled phone call that comes in at a certain time that says, sorry, I have to take this by. Or somebody comes, and if you're working in a facility, it can be, somebody comes in and says, I really need to get you right now. There can be ways you can kind of use your environment to help you enforce that if that's something you struggle with. Um, it can also be doing things like, if people are sending you messages or information outside of the hours you work, Or maybe you're sending a message. One thing I found that can be super helpful if you're trying to keep that boundary is use pre-scheduled emails. So maybe you're writing something off hours when it's convenient for you, but schedule it to send during your business hours so that you're not setting a precedent of, hey, I'm responding in the middle of the night to you, or I'm responding off hours to you. I think sometimes just helping set that structure can make it easier for those of us who tend to let boundaries slip. It can help us keep them. And then yeah, as you said, walking away it could be, I've asked you this many times to please not do this with my dog. I'm just not going to be able to meet with you to, go do whatever that activity is. It's just too hard on my dog. It's too hard on me.
Yeah, I really like the example of sending emails for later or setting it for a later time or being really aware of how much energy or time you're putting into different things that could communicate, oh, is this a boundary or is this a precedent I want to set that I will answer at 3 a.m. or I'm available on the weekends. So for facilitators or trainers um, and sometimes that might look like when we shift into boundaries for ourselves, which is this is a good place to do so. Um, it's important to look at that boundaries can be flexible. So there might be sometimes where you're out in public. I'll just give this example where your energy levels, you have more spoons, if you use the spoon theory, your energy levels feel good that your normal boundary of, okay, I'm not going to talk to, I'm not going to just talk to strangers or educate because I'm out at the grocery store. Maybe you are feeling like someone asked me right now what my service dog does, I think I do have the energy to educate, then you can do that. Boundaries can be flexible, but we always want to check in and reassess. So maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you have a value that I love educating others and there's no question you'll answer any question and that's just a part of your value system, but you're going through something stressful and before you go into the grocery store, before you go out, check in with yourself. Is today a day that your boundaries need to be higher? That you need to have, just like Jen said, a backup plan. I know a task that is one of my I love this task that's like a what's it, graceful exit or
Yeah.
where you can use that, but with like the phone call yourself, you know how you're gonna have to have the service dog utilize that. You can be like, oh, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. I have to take this. Or I can talk for 30 seconds and then you hold yourself to that. And that's to keep your energy levels in check. It's also for your self-respect. And boundaries can be evaluated regularly, reassessing them, checking in before you go into places. And on the blog post or just online, there are helpful scripts. It's very difficult to just know what to say when advocating for yourself. And for those of us who maybe have trauma associated with conflict or just difficulty having these hard conversations, because setting consequences is not easy. They don't have to be harsh consequences, like I'll cut you out of my life. They could be gentle consequences, such as I'm ending the conversation, or I'll see you later, or I've got to go. That's a consequence too. Or that's an end or a shift to the situation. But that can be difficult for some of us who might have trauma or social anxiety. So setting a script, having a script, practicing that script in the mirror. There are boundary setting available, like scripts online. There's a link at the bottom of the blog. There's also books. I encourage you, if this is an area you struggle with, to maybe seek therapy or talk to someone, a life coach, a therapist, resources, self-help books that can get those practice pieces in there. Because the more you practice, the easier it will be to use beneficial boundaries. But shifting over to boundaries for ourselves, this might be the hardest boundary for people to set, such as like the barriers to setting boundaries for ourselves, checking in, making changes to our day, making changes to our schedule to meet our self-care needs, to meet our energy needs, to, yeah, like energy, self-care, health needs. Could be concepts like perfectionism or shame or the belief that we have to do it all or unrealistic expectations. We all have personal histories, we all have personal values and beliefs, and some of those beliefs can hinder our ability to make effective boundaries and to really listen to what our body needs. And avoiding burnout and perfectionism as a service dog handler is very difficult. I know in with I mentioned in part one and part two that I have been a service dog handler. I had a service dog for 10 years, and during the initial piece and all throughout, it can be very challenging not to have a level of perfectionism or self-expectations. And as I am transitioning into pre-service dog and training, adolescent puppy, it's extremely difficult not to feel like I need to be everywhere all at once. My dog and myself have to be at certain milestones. Oh my gosh, 4 months through the first year was like a nightmare on self, perfectionism and where they are standing up in the different courses or the groups that we were in. And it was very easy to fall into a cycle of overworking, burnout for myself. I'm sure Jen can jump in and share, but boundaries can be extremely important and to practice, and even boundaries for yourself. Like I set 1 day or 2 days a week where I do not, if they were talking about a new service dog handler or feeling that perfectionism, where I don't do any like practice or self-judgment. And I give myself and my dog, we'll talk about service dog or talk about boundaries for dogs in a second, but give ourselves a break so that we can really listen to ourselves, um, so that we don't have frustration, fatigue, and resentment from all involved. So I'll let Jen share. Um,
I think the setting the personal boundaries, and especially when you are like in a position of responsibility, and that could be helping care for a child, helping care for a dog, it can be your job, it can be, commitments to people that, whatever that might be. Um, it gets very hard to, I know at least for me, it's very hard to put myself first. And it's very easy for me to just keep shoving myself down on the priority list. And sometimes, and I'm back in a state where I'm not very good at holding this boundary, but one of the boundaries that I found very helpful for me, for example, is to keep one weekend day unscheduled. And I want to get back to that. But that was something, even if I end up working on my computer that day, even if doing stuff, the fact that I don't have to be in any one location, that it can be on my time is really mentally helpful for me. Um, and just keeping certain things, like if there's certain activities you like to do, like I love to hike, I love to sail, keeping certain things that those times win and that those times get to stay for you, even if that means you stop in the middle of whatever else you're doing, just protecting some of the things that you've made for yourself and not sacrificing them. It's so easy to sacrifice them. So I really think being very intentional about blocking, hey, this is my unscheduled time, or this is my whatever me time, and it's non-negotiable. I actually had to fight a boundary for myself with that last week. I was right in the middle of an engineering problem. My day job is engineering, and I was right in the middle of scrambling to get something out to the customer. And I was going to go out and do some sailing with some friends that night. It was a practice. So it wasn't critical I was there, but it's really good for my mental health. And I was looking at the clock going, I don't know if I can go. I may need to cancel. I don't know if I can go. And it was like, I was like, I can just keep working. I can just keep working. And then I was like, no, this is my one break. This is so important for me. And I can come back. And I did. I came back and worked later, but I kept that for me. And it felt so good to have that like 4 hours of just, no, I protected my me time rather than giving it up. Um, and so there's an example of where that's a boundary that I have put in place, and I almost broke my own boundary, but was
yeah.
able to hold it.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little more about how you knew you were crossing a boundary for yourself. Like, was it a thought? Was it a feeling? Was it an emotion?
Yeah, it was definitely an emotion. Like there was almost like this resentment. Like I was stressed about getting this project done or making progress on it. Um, but then I could feel that this is something I've really protected, and I've made a point of protecting this time for myself once a week.
Hmm.
And so I could feel as I was contemplating not taking this break that like it was just like this frustration and resentment and almost disappointment of like, wait a minute, you said this was your time. Why are you giving up your time? And so it was like this internal kind of dialogue, as well as just kind of, I don't know, like a feeling in my gut of like, this isn't right. This isn't fair. And because I've had it be a pattern and a practice, so that pattern and practice helped me keep the boundary. Because I've had a pattern of keeping it, it helped me. Had I not had that consistent pattern, it would have been a lot easier to break it. But I think that's that repeated practice has been critical of, no, this is for me. And so, yeah, it just
Yeah.
didn't feel good.
Yeah. So you had this like body message. It was a thought, a feeling. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's our bodies are the first, often the very first thing to signal when a boundary has been crossed or when it needs to be established. We talked about in the first couple where it's like, how do we know where's good places to put boundaries? And it's usually because we've already been through the situation. We think back and we go, ooh, that didn't feel good. I felt really pressured. I felt like, say you had not had a boundary before, you might have worked all night and then been like, man, I feel really like regretful or disappointed. I should put a boundary there. But in this case, it was almost you had this pre-warning, like, I'm knowingly crossing one of my own boundaries and I'm having this feeling. So connecting in, if we're having lots of different like conflicting emotions, slowing down and really parsing out what is happening here. Why am I feeling this? Can I pinpoint it to a particular emotion or a particular, like, when did that emotion or feeling or thought first come in? What happened right beforehand? Really backtracking so that we can know where a boundary is crossed, or maybe we need to establish a boundary there. And yeah, irritability, frustration, exhaustion,
Hmm.
are all very natural responses and ways that our body communicates to us. And um, something that I think is really difficult, but very important is when we're looking at places to integrate self-care or boundaries. It's really, really, especially for those of us who are like overachievers or we are very passionate, have lots of passions that we want to do. It's really easy for us to add things. So, um, like we can't create more time, but we often try to. So, oh, I'll add this time on, or like, oh, I really need to take care of myself and have a boundary here. I will wake up even earlier and go for a sailing or a walk or a hike because I don't have any time in the day. And then if that's like a band-aid on the situation, or if that's not addressing the core issue, which is I'm feeling like I boundaries are crossed for my time, then you're going to just contribute to that pattern of now we have even less time. We're feeling even more resentful that we're having to steal more time to make more time. So I like to encourage, you can't make more like don't add, but look at places you can take away. And there might be not a lot of places in your life where you can because you work or there's just a lot of demands from family and from friends, but there might be more places than you think that you can either take away or adjust or put limits on. So if we think of our areas of control, maybe we can't control like our work schedule or our medical appointments or things like that. But in the day to day, the very small areas you can control, when you care for yourself, when you eat, maybe when you take showers, even down to the little things, what you eat, what you do, and look and see, can we delegate? Can we do less? Can we ask for help? And all of these pieces of that can lead up to creating really excellent boundaries. Let's
I
see.
think so. And I think also, I think, the other thing to recognize is when we aren't keeping those boundaries and we start getting more burned out and we start getting more tired, everything we do takes more from us and it ends up being more of a vicious cycle. and we're more tired, we're less effective. We could end up saying things in a way that we wouldn't if we had more energy. We could end up doing damage to relationships. And so it can be ironic that putting that extra time into something when you don't have the capacity to do it can actually cause harm when you're trying to help. And so I think really looking at where can we keep certain places for ourselves, and then we're setting that as a good model for our clients and for the people we work with too, of hey, let's prioritize this. Or if you have to, set up, give yourself an excuse to do things based on your dog. Well, my dog really needs this time. So that means I'm not going to shortchange my dog having an hour walk by doing a 10-minute walk. Um, it's easier for us sometimes, or a lot of times, to do something for other beings and other people. And so sometimes that can be a way to force some self-care for yourself, is to also recognize, like, hey, let me do this with my dog.
Yeah, that reminded me. So I saw an advertisement, I think it's with the American Cancer Society, and they have an initiative where it's like walk a mile with your dog. And I love that because normally you have like walk a mile or go for walks. And I love how they included the dog piece. I don't know, it just reminded me of it where it's like, if you're already going to walk a mile, add your dog with it. So you're not adding more time, you're doing that together. I don't know, it just reminded me of it.
Hmm.
But I think this is probably a good segue to talk about, since we're considering and talking so much about including the service dog in boundaries, to talk about boundaries for service dogs. Because if we're working on our boundaries or for ourselves or for clients and the people around us, our dogs deserve to have their boundaries and their boundaries respected. Um,
Yeah, and I
mhm,
think this is a really tough one because what their boundaries are going to change for them as they age and
mhm,
over time.
yeah.
And what you need them to be are also might change for you. Kind of like Michelle said
Mhm,
earlier, if I'm going through the airport, I am much less willing to interact or let anybody say hi to my dog than say I'm
mhm,
casually, at a coffee shop,
right.
where I'm relaxed. Um, and so, or when we're working with a young puppy or a young dog, they may not have the attention span or the focus. We really need them focused and working with us, but they may have lots of energy. They may be willing to do things all day and that not be draining on them. Whereas I've retired my dog. I have a 12-year-old dog. So boundaries for him, it's not fair for him for me to bring him to meetings or on conference travel or anything like that anymore. It's just too much. And so I have to respect his boundaries, have really changed over time. Um, and I think that that's both the dog, the dog shouldn't have to
Mhm,
do extreme means to communicate for you to recognize when you need to help change the boundaries or set different boundaries for them. And I think that's a really challenging thing. I know I can speak to that as someone who's retiring their dog and going through that transition.
mhm.
Um, because you don't want to leave them behind, both for you and for them, and yet they really need that change. And so I think it's really hard to even notice when you need to make that change, sometimes because it's gradual.
Yeah.
And I think just recognizing like some dogs really thrive on social interaction, others really don't.
Mhm,
Um, and so just because maybe you're somebody that's like, hey, come see my dog, maybe that's not what your dog wants.
mhm.
And so
Yeah.
recognizing where their boundaries might be different than your boundaries otherwise would be for them.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I know like when I think of service dogs, or probably when most people think of service dogs, they think of like this calm, friendly, quiet, like able to do anything, able to go anywhere, amusement park to snoozy coffee shop. And I'm like able to be pet or not pet or like in tight spaces. And I wonder if you can kind of speak to this, Jennifer, is like if each dog is an individual, is that this is not hypothetical, is like, is it okay that a service dog individually could prefer some things or not prefer some things? And is that up to the service dog handler to protect and advocate for their dog's boundaries and still be a very good professional, wonderful task trained service dog. They just have their own boundaries.
I think that's critical, and I think it's something that the industry, the service tech industry, is starting to look a little bit more at and be a little less scared of the concept of agency and choice for a service dog. It doesn't mean that a working dog doesn't detect, oh, yes, there's a bomb here. I'll decide today that I don't feel like it. I'm going to go eat an ice cream cone. It doesn't mean that. But it could mean they get to choose, I feel like laying 3 inches this way instead of under this table, and I'm not in the way. It could be choosing, why don't you leave me home when you go to the rock concert?
Yeah.
Um, why don't you leave me home when you go on the 10-mile really hot run?
Hmm.
Um, and recognizing what's fair to ask of them and not.
Yeah.
And that there's times where it may be hard for you to function without them,
Hmm.
but there's certain environments that it's not fair to ask. And, while we want service dogs to be as adaptable as possible, think about yourself in all of those situations.
Hmm.
And we give people grace to not be able to handle tons and tons and tons of situations, but those people have the right to be out in public.
Yeah.
I mean, service dogs, excuse me, obviously have to be safe and adaptable and flexible to be, able to handle a lot of unknowns.
Hmm.
But if we knowingly are bringing them into a stressful situation over and over and over, that is not fair to that dog.
Hmm.
And I think we really deserve, we owe that to them as handlers to be looking out for their best interests, even above
Hmm.
our own. And I think that's something that um, the industry is starting to recognize more and starting to look
Hmm.
more and more at the welfare of the dogs and where can the dogs
Hmm.
choose. And maybe the dog chooses to do something with their paw instead of their nose. Or, maybe you can have some
Yeah.
flexibility in how, obviously having a reliable, predictable cue, but maybe there's some flexibility where the dog gets to choose how they do something.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think the more we can look at even little choices dogs can make.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be giant, huge things, but I think a great
Yeah.
example is just we're at a restaurant. Do they have to be curled in a ball under the table, or could they be under the chair? Could they stand under the table? Could they
Hmm.
sit under the table? As long
Hmm.
as they're non-disruptive, they're, not blocking the aisle, causing issues. Why don't they have the choice of how they
Mm.
quietly handle their body? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And I feel like as someone who, gosh, 10 years ago, like entering in the service dog community and learning all the nuances. And I feel like, as you said, the industry is changing. Maybe the community is changing too. Or my question maybe that you can ask is how can we as a community, service dog handlers, service dog facilitators, help shift that? Because I remember and still feel, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that pressure of like, oh no, my
oh yeah.
dog's not curled up in this tight little donut. I'm going to be seen as like not professional, or I need to really work on this, and we get really stressed out. And I really am attracted to this sense of agency, or this feeling of like more relaxed but still safe and still able to, do the tasks. How can we support each other in the community or facilitators towards that versus the perfectionism and maybe
Yeah.
shame and fear?
I think that's a great point, and especially right now when there's so much kind of fake spotting or shaming
Mm.
going on in society, and so many people questioning, well, is that a service dog? Are you disabled? You don't look disabled. And I
Mhm.
think if to really um, give people some grace if you see someone like maybe their dog's just having a bad day,
Yeah.
or you see, oh, the dog, don't just assume the dog isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing. Um, and give the person some grace and room, and rather than, taking a picture of them and shaming them on the internet, maybe ask, hey, do you need some water for your dog?
Yeah.
Would you like some help? And I
Yeah.
think setting an example of recognizing that under the ADA, a service dog isn't required to be a robot.
Yeah.
They're not even required to not bark. They're required to be under the control of their handler. And to be non-disruptive. So if they bark once or startle once and their handler can calm them down, they're not required to leave that space.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're not required to, and they're allowed to have bad days. Now, the handler may need to take them from that space at that day or that moment. They may not be
Hmm.
appropriate to stay there. But it doesn't mean that same dog in person couldn't be appropriate another time.
Right.
And so I think it's trying to be more kind and generous when we see other teams. Then I think the flip side, though, is it's also our responsibility as handlers to recognize when we're asking too much of our dogs. And we shouldn't be taking our dogs out into these settings where they're likely to struggle, either in training or working, that if we set a precedent of really overdoing it with our dogs, I've had to really pay attention to this personally as I work to retire my dog. I'm like, wait, I help run a service dog nonprofit. I'm not setting a good example if my
Mm.
dog's exhaustively plodding along next to me. That's
Yeah.
not setting a precedent for welfare that I want to set.
Yeah.
And so I think we can set those examples of welfare for animals in our own way we work with them,
Yeah.
helping people see it's okay not to have your dog with you sometimes.
Yeah. Gosh, that's like a relief feeling to me, to just hear it. It's very, because I'm
But we
sure
are live now
everyone
again.
can.
So if we want to do a quick recap, why don't you do that quick recap you just did?
Oh man, when people ask me, what did you just say? Can you repeat it? I'm like, I don't know. It goes out of my mouth and good luck, but I'll try my best. So, just to recap, what I was saying was boundaries protect our emotional energy. It helps us get good communication and keeps us from burning out or spreading too thin. So they're flexible, they can be adjusted, and they're for us. So they're not for others, they're for us. And no one gets boundaries perfect all the time. It's important to practice these boundaries. Um, and the more we practice them, the easier it's going to be for us to utilize them. And I think I talked about a little bit when it jumped off about self-compassion, like setting boundaries as almost a practice of self-compassion, where it's really easy for us to be very self-compassionate to others. So like think of like a good friend that we are compassionate for or compassionate to. We might be hard on ourselves or hold ourselves to a much higher standard or think of how we would treat a friend. That's how we should treat ourselves when it comes to this practice and accommodating ourselves in our boundaries. And yeah, Jen, if you have anything you want to wrap up.
No, I think just, like Michelle said, being patient and with yourself and your dog.
Yeah.
And remembering that it's really important that you advocate for them. And part of being a good working team is recognizing when your working partner needs a break.
Hmm.
And that not only helps set a good precedent for other handlers and other dogs, but it takes care of your working partner and makes sure that they can work well for you successfully when you need them.
Absolutely.
So, um,
Great. Well,
think
I
we're
guess we can
ready?
plug. Oh,
Oh, go ahead.
yes. I guess we can plug our September, because I saw an email today that y'all had confirmed it. I don't know what the topic is, but what did we say that it
We
was?
were we were talking about this is something as people who have lost our service dogs or retiring our service dogs,
Mm.
talking about grief and that process of retiring your dog or how do you juggle the emotions of starting a new dog when you still have your former dog? Or how do you juggle the emotions of your dog suddenly is gone or you've had to euthanize your dog?
Mm.
So, kind of those mixed different feelings is what we were thinking of exploring. And that can even tie into people that handle therapy dogs when
Mhm.
they need to retire their therapy dog and no longer have the social outlet they were used to.
Yeah.
So, that's what we were thinking of exploring in our next FaceTime Live. And we definitely encourage people to join, share their own experiences and stories.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. This is a passion of mine to talk about boundaries. Check out the 3 blog posts, and the resources there.
Yep, they're all at atlasdog.org.